Today we're going to talk about the Pisco Sour, Peruvian classic. The concept of the sour dates back for a very long period of time, but we first start seeing the modern kind of version of the Pisco Sour from the Morris Bar in Lima in the early 1900s. So my name is Mike Ryan. I am the Corporate Beverage Director for Acurio International. I am based in Chicago. We have restaurants all over South America, and then Miami, San Francisco. We have a restaurant here in Chicago called Panta, and in New Jersey, in East Rutherford, in the American Dream Mall, we have Harana. Pisco it's an ingredient that I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding. I know I didn't really understand it for a long time myself. It's basically a brandy. It's made from grapes. These grapes are grown in 5 different states in Peru. There are 8 legal grapes that you're allowed to use to make pisco. You make a wine, distill the wine as you would to make a brandy. By law in Peru, pisco cannot be aged. So the product will be rested in a container that doesn't impart any flavors or colors for a period of 6 months to a year, and then you end up with this lovely clean product. So when you look at bottles of pisco, you'll see things like Quebranta, Italia, Torontel, Moscatel. These are all the different grape varietals. And you'll see Quebranta used in the majority of pisco cocktails, especially for the Pisco Sour. It really is just a very clean expression of the grape. Other grape varietals like Italia or Torontel or Moscatel have a lot of beautiful floral aromas or tropical fruit aromas. This one does have a little bit of that, but it's a lot cleaner. It's a lot lighter, right? The idea is that it's just very straightforward. It's a very clean expression of the grape. When you're making a Pisco Sour, you need a few ingredients ahead of time. I've juiced some fresh limes. I do encourage you to go out, buy some limes, cut them in half, press the juice. It's going to taste a lot better than just buying a box of prepackaged juice. Simple syrup, it's just sugar and water. You can buy it if you want to. Again, I encourage you, just mix sugar and water together. And this particular ratio, this is the Peruvian standard. It's 3 parts of sugar, 2 parts of water. Use hot water, stir it together until it's dissolved, and you end up with this lovely, rich, viscous liquid. You're going to need your pisco, and you're going to need an egg. Again, you can buy prepackaged pasteurized egg whites, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're never going to get quite as much froth and foam in your cocktail if you're using the pasteurized stuff. So let's begin. We'll start with our juice, and you need 1 ounce of fresh lime juice. We're going to add 1 ounce of our simple syrup. And because we're using the traditional Peruvian formula, which is 3 parts pisco, 1 part lime, 1 part simple, we're going to add a walloping 3 ounces of pisco. It's a lot of pisco, but this drink does the trick. All right, next up, we're going to take our egg. All you have to do is crack it in half, rock it back and forth a couple of times, and the egg white just wants to separate itself. You can hang on to your yolks if you want to make ice cream, if you want to make custards, things like that. So next we'll do what's called a dry shake. So we'll combine our egg white with our cocktail, and we just sort of gently rock it together. The purpose for that, egg white mostly contains a protein called albumin, and the albumin, when it comes into contact with the citric acid and the alcohol, starts to denature, right? So those long floppy protein strands start to tighten up. And what we want to do is make sure as we're adding our ice and shaking, we're going to be stretching and folding and stretching and folding those protein strands as they denature, trapping air bubbles inside. That's the whole purpose of the egg white. So we'll add our ice. Again, I'm just using the cubes out of my home freezer. You know, taking a page out of the old mid-quarantine days of filming videos at home. If you've got big clear cubes, that works fantastically. I would try to avoid using tiny little pellets of crushed ice because again, we want to aerate this cocktail as we're shaking. So we're going to combine everything together, and then we just shake. And when you're shaking, you can see I'm shaking firmly, but it's not this super rapid fire shake of a daiquiri. I want long, controlled shaking strokes. Think that you're making a meringue, right? When you're making a meringue, you want long, very sure, very firm strokes, and that gives you very tight bubble structures. So we'll separate. And then we just simply pour. And the idea is you fill your glass just to the brim there. And you can see the kind of glossy texture of this cocktail on top. And that's because we really very intentionally shook those egg whites. The final ingredient is just a drop of Angostura bitters. Angostura bitters is just an aromatic bitter. Got notes of clove, some cinnamon, lots of spice. It's traditional, it's classic, but it also helps kind of mitigate some of the egginess that you might smell when you're nosing this cocktail. And that's it. Classic Peruvian Pisco Sour. Cheers. When you go to Peru and you order a Pisco Sour, they're going to pour you 3 ounces of Pisco, an ounce of lime juice, and an ounce of simple syrup. They're going to throw an egg white in there, and they're used to that. I've run into a lot of my my colleagues, other Americans that go to Peru, and they go have a Pisco Sour. It's delicious. They have another. It's delicious. Now they've had 6 ounces of Pisco, and they don't really realize it. So in our restaurants, we do preserve the ratio of 3 parts to 1 part to 1 part. We bring the total alcohol volume served down a little bit, just to be responsible, right? So we're doing 2 ounces and a quarter of Pisco, 3/4 ounces of lime juice, and 3/4 ounces of simple syrup. So we are preserving that balance, right? The flavor profile of the spirit forwardness of the cocktail is preserved, but we're being a little more careful with how we serve it to our American guests. Absolutely. Light, refreshing. If you've never tasted Pisco Sour is a great way to start because you really get to just experience the Pisco. The lime juice is just there to balance out the sweetness of the simple syrup, and that is just there to sort of create this lovely round support that helps the Pisco stand forward. If you are familiar with flavors of white wines like Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, things like that have that more sort of mineral quality to it, that's what you're going to get. When we say Pisco Sour, it shouldn't be sour, right? A sour cocktail is simply any cocktail that has a citrus juice sweetened with sugar, and then very traditionally would have an egg white to bring the whole thing together. So gin sour, whiskey sour, right, is the cousin to the Pisco Sour. So it really is all about the Pisco. That's a great question. I think the Pisco Sour has endured in popularity partially because it has the weight and the impetus of an entire culture behind it. There are very few other drinking experiences where you can really say I'm sort of encapsulating a culture or I'm really robustly taking part in this culture. Margarita would be similar, right? There are plenty of people who drink a margarita to participate in an element of Mexican culture. Whereas the Pisco Sour really is classically Peruvian. You can get a great Pisco Sour in any bar in Peru. Yeah, in every one of our restaurants, both here and in Latin America, in the Middle East, and Europe, the Pisco Sour is the number one selling cocktail by a very, very wide margin. The only thing that comes even close is a Pisco Sour with a dash of passion fruit in it called the Maracuya Sour. And part of that is, again, we are a Peruvian restaurant company, right? So we are ambassadors of this culture and of this cuisine. So when people walk into a Harana, when they walk into Tanta, when they walk into Lamar, they're being very intentional. And they want to participate in this culture. And the thing that you have to do, if you will, is have a pisco sour. So everybody at least has one. They're delicious. So then a lot of people will at least have potentially one more, maybe one more after that. But yeah, it outsells uh, vodka sodas, it outsells Moscow mules, old fashions, every other cocktail that in every other restaurant company that I've ever worked for is in that top 10 is squashed down by the Pisco Sour. So we have a number of different brands, both here and abroad. Lamar is a little bit more upscale. The idea for Lamar is it's really focused on the bounty of the sea. The original Lamar in Lima set the tone and the standard, and really was a way for Gaston Acurio, the founder of the company, to express the beauty of all of the natural bounty of the ocean near Peru. So we have Lamar in San Francisco and Lamar in Lima. Both of those restaurants, the chefs there are fantastic. So they start with these core elements, beautiful ceviches, some beautiful Peruvian rice dishes, but then they build on that with their own wonderful talents. Tanta here in Chicago, a little bit faster paced. We have this lovely rooftop, but again, the cuisine is rooted in these Peruvian elements. And then Harana is really a celebration of all things Peruvian. So we have an amazing Criollo section of our menu. This very classic sort of Peruvian Creole cooking. This is, a lot of the things that you might get at home, rich, fulfilling dishes. Elements from the Nikkei infusion into Peru, from Chifa, the Chinese influence into Peru. Peru is such a melting pot of different cultures and cuisines all mingling together, but none of them really ever become subsumed. They add to each other, which is one of the beautiful things of this style of food. In general, I'm typically not a huge fan of the idea of pairing cocktails with food. You can do it, but an important differentiation point between cocktails and wine. If you think about wine that works really, really well with food, typically wines that are somewhat off balanced, right? So, Rieslings that have that residual sugar but then high racing acidity, lovely for dishes that have some spice to it, right? We love a Cabernet Sauvignon with a steak because it's kind of overburdened with tannin, and so the fat from the steak helps cut through that tannin. The idea with a cocktail is that it should stand on its own. It should be balanced. It should be finished. So when you pair that with a dish, you frequently will find that the sweetness or the acidity is going to start to clash with certain elements of that bite. So if you're going to do food and cocktail pairing, you almost have to unbalance the cocktail. But then that becomes a very difficult challenge for us to understand when we take a sip of this cocktail and we say, oh, it's really, really bitter, it's really sour, it's really sweet. And then you take a bite of food and you're like, oh, no, wait, this makes sense. All of that being said, the Pisco Sour, it works well with a lot of the dishes that you see very often in Peruvian cuisine. It's fantastic with ceviche. It does have that acidity. It's got just a little bit of sweetness to it, but that clean bite of the grape really helps cut through and celebrate that ceviche. I don't know that I would have a Pisco Sour next to my steak. I will probably want to go for big beefy red wine for that. But this also works really nicely with a lot of the chifa elements, right? Our fried rices, our chalfas, because again, they'll typically have a little bit of that sweetness, typically a little bit of acidity as well, and so the Pisco Sour can kind of sit right in the middle there. If you've never had a Pisco Sour, give it a shot. If you've had one, then you know how great it is. But I would also encourage you to give Pisco a shot on its own. It's fantastic in a Pisco Sour. It's amazing in a Chilcano. It's great in a Pisco Punch. But just drinking Pisco on its own is fantastic. After dinner as a digestif, you can have a a very rich style Mosto Verde. For dinner as an aperitif, something a little bit lighter, something like a quebranta or maybe a negra criolla. But pisco is the base for this lovely drink. So, ¿por qué no los dos?